Welcome to Aging Insight with your host, John Ross and Lisa Shoalmire. This program is made possible by
Welcome everyone to Aging Insight. I'm Lisa Shoalmire and I'm here with John Ross, and we're elder law attorneys here in the area. And we always like to come to your home and bring you information that you might be able to use, or I bet our information, if you can't use it, I bet a friend or a neighbor can. So we appreciate you investing your time in Aging Insight. And we're going to give you a lot of information that can help you navigate through the aging and retiring process, because it's as a thing I saw one time, John said, getting older is not for sissies. So
yeah, that's right. That's right. And we spend a lot of our time with clients, in many cases, dispelling myths that they have heard out in the community, that they come in and they're very concerned about.
Right.
And when in fact they really didn't have much to be concerned about.
Yeah, there's plenty to worry about for real without worrying about the made up stuff. So
yeah. And things like the estate tax, for example. People hear about the death tax, and I can't tell you, I bet somebody once a week comes in because they don't want all their money going to the government, not ever realizing that only applies to people that have, for a married couple, over $11 million in assets. And when I tell them that, they're like, "Oh, well, I'm not in that category,
right.
So we're good." And I say, "Yeah, I figured you were. That's only in 2016 that the estate tax was only paid by 0.2% of the population."
Every now and then I have a client that needs some help with that, but it's a rarity.
Yeah, so we do a lot of myth busting out there, and with the prevalence of the internet and various news sources and opinion pieces that are out there floating around, as laws change or new laws are added or tweaked around, many times as the information spreads through the internet, through the community, it can get distorted, right, either intentionally or unintentionally, so that by the time it's gotten to your ears, it's something completely different than what it actually is.
Right, and so there was an issue that came up, and we thought today we would spend some time bringing you the truth about an issue that many seniors are very concerned about, mm-hmm. and it has to do with, if you receive Social Security, can you still remain and exercise your Second Amendment right to bear arms? And John, you really wouldn't think Social Security and a constitutional right to bear arms would be in the same conversation, but yet there have been some law changes and some rule changes that I believe have been misconstrued in order to scare seniors, in order maybe for ratings. So today let's talk about those new rules and who these rules impact and what it means for most of our retirees.
Yeah, and this really, it started for me on December 19th. Of 2016, right before the Christmas holiday, and I'm sitting there playing around on my phone reading news articles when I see a headline that says the Social Security Administration passes final regulations to take the guns from grandma. Well,
yeah, that's a little scary.
I've got a lot of grandmas as clients, so I thought I better read this rule and figure out what's going on, and so that was the headline. And as I saw that headline, I started seeing several others that were basically making the claim that there was a new Social Security rule that was going to deny seniors their right to own firearms. Now, we can go ahead and cut out that that's not the truth.
That's not the truth.
But we probably, to explain this, I guess maybe there's a little background here.
Right. So, this rule, and there is a rule about certain persons who receive certain types of Social Security may have their right to own firearms removed. But what is Social Security doing making rules about firearms and the constitutional right to bear those arms? Well, here's the deal. Way back when Congress passed the National Firearms Act, I believe we've had several versions of it, but a version in the 1960s, I believe, made it to where a person who is mentally defective cannot possess or own a firearm. And there was several other categories of persons that couldn't own or possess a firearm. For instance, a person who was a convicted felon, a person who had been adjudicated by a court as incompetent, a person who had various drug abuse offenses on their record. And so there was a list of individuals who had their right to bear arms removed by Congress under this National Firearms Act. But John, one thing Congress does frequently is they pass a law, and the law is worded a bit vague, and Congress in the same law says, here's the big law, here's the big picture, and we are going to delegate to the agencies specific rules and regulations that they can make up in order to further the purpose of this law.
That's right. And so you almost get what is often referred to as the fourth branch of government, which is these administrative agencies who, when they make rules, those rules essentially become law.
Correct.
And so and yet those laws are not ever passed by Congress.
Right.
Or
Your
else,
congressman didn't vote for it. It was just
it's just out there.
Right.
And so like Lisa said, so that you've got this list of people who cannot be in possession, buy, sell, transport firearms. And it's relatively easy to determine most of them. Either you've been convicted of a felony or you haven't. Either you're an 8-year-old child or you're a 30-year-old adult. It's relatively easy to make those sort of determinations. But when you start talking about mental health, it gets a lot blurrier. And so when you start talking about mental health, there's people who are clearly competent, they just have some mental health issues. There are people who are clearly incompetent because of their mental health issues. And in the middle is this whole range of people who are mentally able to do some things but not others, who are perfectly competent while they're on medication, but perfectly incompetent when they're not. People who range from competent to incompetent, from day to night and back to day again. And so there's a lot of different, this makes mental illness very difficult. Now, as a government out there, they don't want crazy people having guns.
True.
Problem is figuring out who these crazy people are. And so there is a list of people who are not supposed to be in possession of firearms. It's maintained by the FBI.
Right.
It's the NICS database.
Right. This is the instant background check list that keeps the name of all the people who fall into the categories that they cannot possess a firearm. And so the Social Security Administration has made some rules where they are going to forward names of certain Social Security recipients to this list, but you'll have to stick around to find out the details of how they decide which names they're going to send. So stick with us.
Welcome to Heritage Plaza Nursing Center, where a compassionate, skilled nursing team is dedicated to the care of our residents and committed to creating a better social and physical environment. With comprehensive rehabilitation services and individualized programs, we help each resident live life to the fullest. At Heritage Plaza, you feel the difference and see the results as we nourish the spirit through our Lifetime Wellness program with a variety of activities. Come tour Heritage Plaza Nursing Center and see what we offer the seniors of Texarkana and the surrounding areas.
The Wadley Senior Clinic has been such a blessing for our family. Because they specialize in geriatric care, they take the time to really focus on Dad's needs. Their exam rooms are specially designed for seniors, and they offer lab and x-ray on site. With monthly educational programs on health and wellness of the mind and body, our healthcare questions get answered. Best of all, they accept Dad's Medicare benefits. See what the Wadley Senior Clinic can do for you. Wadley Senior Clinic, where healthy relationships begin.
We all need a little help sometimes. That's why Twin City Rehab is here to help. Twin City Rehab guides people of all ages through a smooth recovery experience in their new facility on the corner of Morris and Hampton Road in Texarkana, Texas. We specialize in physical, occupational, and speech therapy and wound care, IV administrations, and parenteral nutrition. We offer inpatient and outpatient rehabilitation, private suites, transition apartments, and a state-of-the-art gym. Our goal is to get you back on your feet and back at home. Twin City Rehab, next to Reunion Plaza Senior Care.
Welcome back to Aging Insight, everybody. I'm John Ross here with Lisa Shoalmire, and today we're doing a little bit of myth busting because there has recently been some changes in the way Social Security Administration and firearm ownership are going to interact. And unfortunately, a lot of these rule changes have been blown out of proportion. And so many of our retirees who receive Social Security benefits have become worried that these changes are going to affect them. And so today we're talking about what these rule changes are and why most of you probably don't have anything to worry about.
Right. So before the break, we talked about how the FBI maintains a list of persons who are prohibited from owning firearms, and the FBI receives the names that are on this list from court proceedings, from medical doctors, from various sources, and some new rules direct that the Social Security Administration should forward names of certain Social Security recipients to this list for inclusion so that those persons cannot own a firearm either. So John, the Social Security Administration, they have a framework that they're supposed to use in order to determine if a name goes from the Social Security Administration to the FBI list.
That's right. And so essentially what the Social Security Administration has done is they've come up with a list of 5 items. And a person must meet all 5 of these items in order for their name to get referred over to the NICS database. And so the first one on this list, and this really solves the issue, this number 1 item really generally solves the issue for most Social Security recipients. And that is, the first one is, you have to have filed a claim for Social Security based on disability. So for your average person who's worked their whole life, has reached retirement age of, say, early retirement at 62 or full retirement at 66 or delayed retirement at 70 or anywhere in between there, what you're making a claim for are Social Security retirement benefits, not disability benefits. So for all of the folks that just receive regular old Social Security retirement, this law does not apply to you. Now, that being said, it does apply to people who have made a claim based on disability.
Right.
And if you make a claim based on disability and later reach age 66, full retirement age, your benefit does become
the retirement benefit.
But I think this law would still apply to you on that category because your original claim was based on disability.
And we do have a number of clients that we have that maybe had filed in their late 50s or early 60s for disability, and they received that, and then when they reach 62, 65, 66, it flips over to the retirement benefit. So I think we'll go on down and look at the next factors, so that way see if it applies to anyone else. But the second factor they look at, Social Security is directed to look at, is whether or not the disability determination, because remember, this is you receiving Social Security based on disability. The next factor is if the disability is a mental health issue that is listed as part of the disabilities approved by Social Security for mental health problems.
Yeah, so they've come up with, I mean, there's a long list in the Social Security regulations of various mental health disorders. And there's lots of different ones in there, but they have picked some of these that they think would be particularly relevant related to firearm ownership. And so if your claim for disability is based on one of these particular categories of mental health disorders, then you're going to meet the second test. And then the third test is kind of tied into this one.
Right. The third test has to do with, is your primary disability a mental health disability? And
you know, I think you used the example when we talked about this on the radio show of a veteran, let's say a veteran who during combat was catastrophically injured.
Right, you know, lost limbs or
yeah,
something.
and so they're clearly disabled, and so their disability is based on their catastrophic physical injuries. But as a part of that, they also have PTSD and other mental health issues that have gone along with that. But the third factor here is what is your primary disability claim? And so for this veteran, for example, the primary disability is based on the physical, and even if one of the other mental health issues is present and part of the record, then this rule still wouldn't apply to them because it's not the primary reason for their disability.
Yeah. So let's recap. So the Social Security Administration has to forward the names of Social Security disability recipients so long as the person has filed a claim based on disability, that disability is listed as part of Social Security's approved disabilities related to mental illness, and third, that the primary disability is in fact the mental illness. And but we still have two more categories to check off before the name goes to the FBI list, so stick around and we'll talk about those.
We all need a little help sometimes. That's why Twin City Rehab is here to help. Twin City Rehab guides people of all ages through a smooth recovery experience in their new facility on the corner of Morris and Hampton Road in Texarkana, Texas. We specialize in physical, occupational, and speech therapy, and wound care, IV administrations, and parenteral nutrition. We offer inpatient and outpatient rehabilitation, private suites, transition apartments, and a state-of-the-art gym. Our goal is to get you back on your feet and back at home. Twin City Rehab, next to Reunion Plaza Senior Care.
I'm so glad we found a Wadley Senior Clinic. Their team specializes in caring for older adults, and their doctors listen and work with me to keep me healthy and independent. With monthly educational programs, x-ray and lab, and state-of-the-art exam rooms, I get expert care and understanding about what I'm going through. Best yet, they're easy to get to right off the interstate at Jefferson. See what Wadley Senior Clinic could do for you. Wadley Senior Clinic, where healthy relationships begin.
Welcome to Heritage Plaza Nursing Center, where a compassionate, skilled nursing team is dedicated to the care of our residents and committed to creating a better social and physical environment. With comprehensive rehabilitation services and individualized programs, we help each resident live life to the fullest. At Heritage Plaza, you feel the difference and see the results as we nourish the spirit through our Lifetime Wellness program with a variety of activities. Come tour Heritage Plaza Nursing Center and see what we offer the seniors of Texarkana and the surrounding areas.
Welcome back to our final segment today of Aging Insight. And today we're dispelling some myths out there that we've seen recently related to Social Security recipients and their ability to own firearms. And so we thought we'd take the time today to explain the new rules and basically give assurance to most of our viewers that these new rules do not apply to our Social Security retirees. So John, we've talked about that Social Security has to look at 5 factors, and the individual in question has to meet all 5 factors.
Right, you can't just meet one, you got to meet all five.
5.
You've got to have made a claim for disability, you've got to have a diagnosis of one of their particular mental disorders, and that has to be the primary reason that you're getting disability. And then fourth, the fourth factor is that you're between 18 and full retirement age, which depending on your birth year is going to range somewhere in the 65, 66, 67 age frame right now. So you've got to be in between those. So again, this is going to cut out most of your retirees. Now, your folks who are injured, people that have birth-related disabilities that turn 18, yeah, these folks, it's going to apply to them, at least on this particular factor. But again, for most of your seniors out there, the fact that this rule only applies to people who are between 18 and full retirement age is going to cut most of them out.
Right. So, and the final factor that Social Security is directed to look at is whether or not the recipient of that Social Security disability has a representative payee. Now, a representative payee is another adult who is taking care of the money, who's taking care of that Social Security disability payment on behalf of the disabled person. And so if we have a person who is filed for disability for a mental health issue that's listed by Social Security, and that's their primary problem, and they're between the ages of 18 and 65, if they don't have a representative payee, well then that person can still own a firearm. So this final factor has to do with whether Social Security has deemed that the recipient of the disability cannot manage their funds and they're incapable of doing that, so they have a representative who does that for them. And while representative payees are not uncommon, particularly for disability claims, you know, this is just another factor that the Social Security has to add into the mix before they can release that name to the FBI list for no firearms ownership.
But you know, one thing about that representative payee is that Social Security does not recognize a power of attorney.
Right.
And so anybody that's watched the show before has heard us countless times talk about the importance of powers of attorney, but it's still not going to do you any good with Social Security. They don't look at them. And so for our senior clients who need help managing their finances or need help dealing with the Social Security Administration, the only way they can do that is by getting a representative payee, a family member, somebody appointed through the Social Security process. And I think many people out there might fear that if they go and get a representative payee, that somehow this is going to equate to their name being placed on the NICS database list, which it's not. That's only one of the 5 factors. And so probably not too big of an issue right there. Mm-hmm. Now, my concern, at least with it, is because it's a big government agency. I can certainly see the 30-year-old John Smith applying for disability because of a mental illness, and the 66-year-old John Smith filing for retirement benefits at the same time, and the wrong name gets put on the list.
Right. And so one of the things we always look at is when a right is removed, and certainly the right to bear arms is enshrined in the Constitution, but when that right is removed, what sort of due process is involved in removing that right and restoring that right if it's removed improperly? So I do have some questions here about the due process.
Yeah, unfortunately, there really is none. Essentially, the Social Security Office makes this determination on their own, sends this information, your name is now on that list, and then they notify you that it's been done.
And then it's your burden to prove that you shouldn't be on the list.
And helpfully so, the Social Security Administration, in their own rules, has given themselves 365 days to respond to your request to have your name removed from the list because it was inadvertently placed there, or that there's some other reason why it shouldn't be there. So I don't really like that, because I can see the inadvertent placement because of a technical error or something like that. So that does give me a bit of concern.
Well,
there.
and it seems like the due process here is flipped. Normally, before a right is removed, there is notice that you're at risk of losing that right, and then there's a hearing of some kind about whether or not that right should be removed. And if those two, notice and hearing, happen and it's concluded the right should be removed, well, then the right is removed, and you still have appeals if you like to. So here, the right is removed, and you don't receive any notice until after the right has been removed, and the hearing opportunity to restore that right could take a year plus.
Now, this whole context of government benefits and gun ownership, this is all new as it relates to Social Security. It's not new to other government agencies. So, for example, we've been dealing with this issue in the veterans benefit context for years. The VA, like Social Security, does not recognize a power of attorney. And so when we have a veteran who, let's say, has the middle stages of Alzheimer's and is applying for some veterans benefits for some home care or something like that, if the VA looks at the medical records and makes a determination that they don't think the person can manage their funds, they will send a letter out that says, we, the VA, plan on making a determination that you are not fit to manage your funds and need an authorized payee.
A fiduciary.
A fiduciary. Yes. But right below that paragraph is another paragraph that says, if we do this, you will have been declared mentally unfit for purposes of firearm ownership, and your name is going to be placed on the NICS list and stuff. But at least they give you the opportunity to rebut it first.
Well, but the other thing, though, is, John, is that the only criteria the VA is using is essentially whether or not you can manage your funds.
Yeah, which is completely false.
As opposed to the Social Security criteria of all 5 of those criteria.
Yeah. So somewhere in there might be the right way to do
right.
it, but unfortunately it's the way we've got, not the you play with the team you've got, not the team you want. So once again, you've reached the end of another episode of Aging Insight. If you want to catch past episodes, you can always check out our website at aginginsight.com. You can watch old episodes. You can listen to our radio program, which we do live every Saturday at noon, and you can listen to past episodes as well. You can also read a copy of our Aging Insight magazine right there on the website. So there's really no reason, no excuse for you to not be fully informed when it comes to how to navigate through your senior years. We're giving it all to you.
So yeah, and if there's something you would like to see, you can always go to Aging Insight on Facebook and let us know if there's some topics that you would like to see us address here on Aging Insight Television. So we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Aging Insight program with John Ross and Lisa Shoalmire. This program is made possible by